The briefing room fell silent as Captain Sarah Martinez stepped through the heavy oak doors of the command center. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of 24 officers clustered around a tactical display table. Maps covered every surface, red pins marking enemy positions across the mountainous terrain of eastern Afghanistan. General Morrison stood at the head of the table, his weathered hands gripping the edges as he studied satellite imagery. At 58, he carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who had climbed every rung of military hierarchy through conventional wisdom and unwavering adherence to protocol. His gray eyes swept the room before settling on the mission parameters displayed on the digital screen. Convoy Delta 7, 17 vehicles carrying medical supplies and ammunition to forward operating Base Guardian, had been pinned down for 6 hours in Kandahar province. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in the rocky outcroppings above Highway 7, turning the narrow mountain pass into a killing zone. 3 soldiers were confirmed wounded, 2 critically. Standard ground extraction was impossible due to the elevated enemy positions and limited cover below. Sarah moved quietly along the back wall, her flight suit still bearing dust from morning training exercises. At 29, she had already logged more combat hours than most pilots twice her age, but her unconventional tactics and willingness to challenge standard procedures had earned her a reputation that made senior officers uncomfortable. Her call sign Phoenix reflected both her ability to rise from seemingly impossible situations and her tendency to leave conventional wisdom in ashes. Where are you watching this from today? Are you somewhere that values innovation over tradition? Or do you find yourself in places where new ideas face resistance? The story of what happened next might depend on which environment you know better. Colonel Hayes, the operation commander, traced his finger along the convoy route on the tactical display. $20 says we lose at least 2 birds trying a standard approach. He glanced toward the aviation section. Torres, what is your assessment for helicopter insertion? Major Torres stepped forward, his arms already crossed as he examined the terrain. The approach corridor is barely 300 meters wide, with enemy positions on both ridgelines. Any conventional extraction puts our aircraft directly in the kill zone for extended periods. His partner nodded grimly. We are looking at significant casualties, even if we succeed. Sarah cleared her throat softly. Request permission to speak, sir. General Morrison looked up from the maps, his expression shifting to mild irritation at the interruption. Captain Martinez, I was not aware aviation had additional assets available. Sir, I am requesting assignment to lead the extraction using an Apache helicopter. The terrain requires precision maneuvering that conventional approaches cannot provide. The general straightened slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. Torres shifted his weight, uncrossing his arms only to fold them again more tightly. Several other officers turned to stare at Sarah, their expressions ranging from surprise to barely concealed amusement. Captain, Morrison said, his tone carrying the patient condescension reserved for junior officers who had overstepped their bounds, Apaches are not for weekend warriors. This is a combat extraction in heavily contested airspace, not a training exercise. Dalton, a senior warrant officer with 15 years of helicopter experience, actually smiled. Ma'am, with respect, that convoy needs experienced pilots with proven track records in high-threat environments. This is not the time for on-the-job learning. Sarah maintained her position near the wall, her hands clasped behind her back in regulation posture. Sir, my flight hours in contested airspace exceed those of any pilot currently available. The terrain requires unconventional approach vectors that standard procedures cannot accommodate. General Morrison set down his pen with deliberate precision. Captain, your personnel file shows impressive test scores and adequate performance in controlled environments. However, this mission requires pilots with actual combat experience, not simulation achievements. Hayes leaned back in his chair, already mentally assigning the mission to his senior aviators. Morrison is right. We need seasoned veterans for this type of operation, not experimental tactics. The room remained quiet except for the steady hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of rotor blades from the flight line. Sarah could feel the weight of skeptical gazes, the unspoken assumptions that her request was born from inexperience rather than tactical insight. She had seen this pattern before, the automatic dismissal that accompanied any suggestion that deviated from established doctrine. Torres cleared his throat. "Sir, Captain Mitchell and Warrant Officer Davis are our most experienced Apache crew. They have successfully completed similar extractions in this operational area." Morrison nodded approvingly. Exactly the kind of proven leadership this mission requires. Mitchell has over 2,000 combat hours and knows these mountains better than anyone. Sarah remained silent, recognizing that further argument would only reinforce their perception of her as an overconfident junior officer. She watched as the general outlined the standard extraction protocol, a straightforward approach that would expose the rescue aircraft to concentrated enemy fire for the extended time required to evacuate wounded personnel. The plan relied on overwhelming firepower and speed, textbook tactics that worked well in open terrain but ignored the unique challenges of the narrow mountain corridor. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, with detailed discussions of approach vectors, fire support coordination, and casualty evacuation procedures. Sarah listened carefully, noting the assumptions built into every aspect of the plan. The officers around the table spoke with the confidence of men who had successfully executed similar missions, their experience forming an unshakable foundation for their tactical decisions. As the meeting concluded, Morrison gathered his papers and addressed the room with finality. "Gentlemen, we launch at 1400 hours. Mitchell, your crew has the lead. Let's bring our people home." The officers began filing out of the briefing room, their conversations focused on equipment checks and pre-flight preparations. Sarah remained near the wall, watching as the opportunity to save lives through innovative tactics slipped away in favor of conventional wisdom and institutional prejudice. She knew that in 3 hours, good soldiers would attempt a dangerous mission using methods that ignored both the terrain and her demonstrated capabilities. The fluorescent lights continued their monotonous humming as the room emptied, leaving only the maps and the lingering scent of coffee and old paper. Sarah finally moved toward the door, her mind already calculating alternative approaches and unconventional solutions that no one had asked her to consider. Sarah walked across the tarmac toward the flight operations building, her boots crunching against the gravel that had been baked white by the Afghan sun. The temperature had already climbed past 100 degrees, and heat waves shimmered above the concrete like liquid glass. Apache helicopters sat in perfect rows along the flight line, their angular silhouettes casting sharp shadows that offered brief relief from the relentless heat. She pushed through the glass doors into the air-conditioned coolness of flight ops, where duty officers coordinated missions from behind banks of radio equipment and computer terminals. The walls displayed charts showing aircraft availability, weather conditions, and threat assessments updated hourly by intelligence analysts. Sarah moved to her assigned workstation and began reviewing the morning's incident reports, searching for patterns that might inform tactical decisions. The database contained detailed records of every helicopter operation conducted in the region over the past 18 months. Sarah scrolled through mission summaries, casualty reports, and after-action reviews, building a comprehensive picture of how different crews had handled similar challenges. The data revealed a troubling pattern of predictable approaches that enemy forces had learned to anticipate and counter. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes approached her desk, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had spent the morning dealing with bureaucratic frustrations. "Sarah, I heard about your request in the briefing. Morrison can be set in his ways, but he has good reasons for relying on experienced crews." Sarah looked up from her computer screen. "Sir, the mission profile shows enemy positions that specifically target conventional approach vectors. Standard extraction procedures put our aircraft directly into prepared kill zones." Barnes sat down in the adjacent chair, his voice lowering to avoid attracting attention from nearby personnel. I understand your concerns, but Mitchell and Davis have successfully completed dozens of extractions in hostile territory. Their track record speaks for itself. The Flight Operations Center buzzed with constant activity as personnel coordinated fuel deliveries, maintenance schedules, and crew assignments. Radio chatter from ongoing missions provided a steady background of tactical communications, weather updates, and status reports. Sarah watched as other pilots prepared for routine reconnaissance flights and supply runs. Their confidence built on years of executing standard procedures without serious complications. Sir, Sarah continued, my analysis shows that enemy forces have adapted their tactics specifically to counter our conventional approaches. They position their weapons to create overlapping fields of fire along the most obvious insertion routes. Flying straight into those zones will result in casualties we can avoid. Barnes sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Sarah, your tactical insights are valuable, but combat experience cannot be replaced by theoretical analysis. Mitchell has survived situations that would have destroyed less experienced crews because he understands how to read terrain and enemy behavior in real time. Sarah turned her computer screen so Barnes could see the mission data she had compiled. These reports show increasing casualties among helicopter crews using standard approaches in mountainous terrain. Enemy forces are learning our patterns and preparing countermeasures specifically designed to exploit our predictable tactics. The lieutenant colonel studied the information for several minutes, his expression growing more serious as he recognized the implications of the trend Sarah had identified. You are right about the pattern, but changing established procedures requires more than statistical analysis. It requires proven alternatives and crews capable of executing non-standard operations under combat conditions. Across the room, Captain Mitchell was reviewing flight plans with his co-pilot. Their conversation focused on fuel calculations and equipment loadouts. At 42, Mitchell carried himself with the quiet confidence of a pilot who had survived hundreds of combat missions through careful adherence to proven techniques. His methodical approach to pre-flight preparation reflected years of experience that had taught him to trust established procedures over experimental innovations. Sarah watched Mitchell work, recognizing his competence while simultaneously understanding that his expertise was built on assumptions that enemy forces had learned to exploit. The Taliban fighters in the mountains had studied American helicopter tactics for years, positioning their weapons and coordinating their attacks to maximize damage against predictable flight patterns. Barnes stood up, finishing his coffee before addressing Sarah again. I will speak with Morrison about incorporating your analysis into our tactical planning, but the mission this afternoon will proceed as briefed. Mitchell and Davis need to focus on execution, not experimental procedures. Sarah nodded, accepting the decision while continuing to study the tactical data on her screen. The convoy remained pinned down in the mountain pass, their situation deteriorating as enemy forces adjusted their positions to maintain suppressing fire. Radio reports indicated that the wounded soldiers were stable but required immediate medical evacuation to prevent their conditions from becoming critical. The Flight Operations Center continued its efficient coordination of multiple missions, with personnel tracking aircraft positions, weather changes, and threat assessments across the entire operational area. Sarah listened to radio communications from other units, noting how crews reported enemy contact and adapted their tactics based on real-time intelligence. The professional competence of the aviation community was evident in every aspect of their operations, from maintenance protocols to emergency procedures. Yet beneath the surface of institutional efficiency, Sarah recognized the limitations imposed by rigid adherence to conventional wisdom. The same procedures that had proven successful in previous conflicts were becoming predictable vulnerabilities in an environment where enemy forces had time to study and counter American tactics. Innovation required not just technical skill, but the institutional flexibility to question established approaches when circumstances demanded adaptation. Barnes returned to his own duties, leaving Sarah to continue her analysis of tactical trends and potential countermeasures. She understood that challenging conventional wisdom required more than identifying problems. It required demonstrating solutions under conditions that left no room for error. The convoy in the mountains represented both an urgent humanitarian crisis and an opportunity to prove that unconventional approaches could succeed where standard procedures would fail. The morning progressed with typical military efficiency as crews prepared for afternoon missions and support personnel coordinated logistics across multiple operational areas. Sarah completed her analysis and filed her recommendations through proper channels, knowing that institutional change occurred slowly even when confronted with compelling evidence. The immediate challenge remained convincing decision-makers that innovation represented opportunity rather than unnecessary risk. At 11:30, word came through radio communications that the convoy situation had worsened. Enemy reinforcements had arrived during the night, strengthening their positions along the ridgelines and making conventional extraction even more dangerous. The wounded soldiers needed immediate evacuation, but standard approaches would expose rescue aircraft to concentrated fire from multiple directions simultaneously. At 1300 hours, the Apache helicopters began their pre-flight checks along the Sunbake flight line. Captain Mitchell moved methodically around his aircraft, inspecting control surfaces and weapon systems with the practiced efficiency of a pilot who had performed the same routine hundreds of times. His co-pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Davis, completed internal systems checks while ground crews verified fuel loads and ammunition counts. Sarah stood outside the flight operations building, watching the preparation activities through the chain-link fence that separated the administrative area from the active flight line. The heat rising from the concrete created distortions that made the distant helicopters appear to shimmer and dance. Radio chatter from the control tower provided a steady stream of clearances and weather updates as aircraft prepared for departure. The convoy had been under fire for 8 hours now. Radio communications from the trapped soldiers painted a picture of increasing desperation as ammunition ran low and the wounded soldiers showed signs of deteriorating condition. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the convoy commander, reported enemy movement that suggested the Taliban fighters were positioning for a final assault that would overrun the defensive positions. Mitchell's Apache lifted off precisely at 1400 hours, its twin engines generating the distinctive whipping sound of rotor blades cutting through superheated air. The aircraft banked toward the mountains, followed closely by Davis in the second Apache and a medical evacuation helicopter that would extract the wounded once the gunships had cleared the landing zone of enemy threats. Sarah monitored the mission progress through radio communications relayed to the Flight Operations Center. The initial approach proceeded according to standard protocols, with the Apache crews following established flight corridors designed to minimize exposure to ground-based threats. Intelligence reports had identified the most likely enemy positions, and the flight plan incorporated suppressive fire missions intended to neutralize hostile forces before the medical helicopter arrived. 20 minutes after departure, Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio speakers. Control, Predator 2-1. We have visual contact with the convoy. Enemy positions confirmed along both ridgelines. Beginning attack, run, permission profile. The radio fell silent except for the occasional burst of static as the Apache crews coordinated their assault on the Taliban positions. Sarah listened intently, recognizing the careful professionalism in Mitchell's communications even as she mentally tracked his probable flight path through terrain that offered enemy forces multiple opportunities for concentrated fire. Predator 2-1. Taking effective fire from grid reference 774962. Multiple muzzle flashes observed along eastern ridgeline. The attack proceeded according to plan for the first 15 minutes. Mitchell and Davis systematically engaged, identified enemy positions with rockets and cannon fire. Their coordinated assault designed to suppress hostile forces long enough for the medical helicopter to complete its evacuation mission. Radio reports indicated successful hits on several Taliban fighting positions. Then the situation changed rapidly. Predator 2-1. We have additional contacts. Multiple RPG teams moving to alternate positions. They are repositioning faster than anticipated. Sarah recognized the tactical problem immediately. The enemy forces had prepared multiple firing positions along the ridgelines, allowing them to shift locations as soon as the Apache crews engaged their initial positions. The Taliban fighters had studied American helicopter tactics extensively, developing countermeasures specifically designed to exploit the predictable nature of conventional attack patterns. Control, Predator 2-1. Taking heavy fire from secondary positions. Enemy forces have established interlocking fields of fire along the primary approach corridor. The radio communications became more urgent as Mitchell and Davis found themselves flying through increasingly concentrated hostile fire. Their standard attack profile, while technically sound, had become predictable enough for enemy forces to prepare elaborate defensive measures. The Taliban fighters had positioned their weapons to create kill zones along the most obvious flight paths. Predator 2-1, we are taking multiple hits. Davis is reporting hydraulic pressure loss. Recommend aborting current approach and reassessing tactical situation. Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the terrain and understanding exactly what was happening in the mountains. The conventional approach that had worked successfully in previous missions was failing because enemy forces had learned to anticipate and counter established American tactics. The Apache crews were flying into prepared ambushes that exploited the predictable nature of standard procedures. The medical evacuation helicopters circled at a safe distance, unable to approach the convoy while enemy forces maintained effective fire on the landing zone. The wounded soldiers remained trapped, their condition worsening as the rescue mission stalled against well-prepared defensive positions. Control, Predator 2-2. My aircraft has sustained significant damage to tail rotor assembly. Recommending immediate return to base for emergency landing procedures. Within 30 minutes of beginning their attack, both Apache helicopters were forced to withdraw due to battle damage sustained from concentrated enemy fire. The conventional approach had failed exactly as Sarah had predicted, leaving the convoy in the same desperate situation while consuming valuable aircraft and risking crew lives in an unsuccessful rescue attempt. Mitchell's voice carried frustration and professional disappointment as he reported the mission failure. Control, Predator flight returning to base. Enemy positions too well prepared for standard approach vectors. Medical evacuation cannot proceed under current tactical conditions. The Flight Operations Center erupted in controlled activity as personnel coordinated emergency landing procedures for the damaged helicopters and began planning alternative rescue approaches. Sarah listened to the radio traffic, understanding that institutional preference for conventional tactics had produced exactly the outcome her analysis had predicted. General Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter with unmistakable authority. All units, this is 6 actual. Stand down current operations and reassess tactical situation. Convoy Delta 7 remains in critical condition, requiring immediate extraction. The afternoon sun continued its relentless assault on the concrete flight line as the damaged Apache helicopters limped back toward base. Sarah watched their approach, noting the visible battle damage that confirmed the effectiveness of enemy countermeasures against predictable American tactics. The mission failure represented both a tactical defeat and validation of her analytical assessment. Radio communications from the convoy painted an increasingly desperate picture. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reported that enemy forces were massing for what appeared to be a coordinated assault on the defensive positions. The wounded soldiers needed immediate medical attention, but conventional rescue approaches had proven ineffective against well-prepared enemy positions. Sarah walked back into the Flight Operations Center, where personnel scrambled to develop alternative plans for extracting the trapped convoy. The failure of standard procedures had created an operational crisis that demanded innovative solutions, exactly the type of situation where unconventional tactics could prove their value. The question remained whether institutional prejudice would prevent decision-makers from considering approaches that challenged established doctrine. The emergency briefing convened in the same conference room where Sarah had been dismissed 4 hours earlier. General Morrison stood at the tactical display, his earlier confidence replaced by the grim determination of a commander facing an operational crisis. The failed rescue attempt had left 2 Apache helicopters with significant battle damage and a convoy still trapped in increasingly desperate circumstances. Colonel Hayes spread updated intelligence reports across the table, his voice tight with urgency. Latest reconnaissance shows enemy reinforcements arriving throughout the afternoon. We are now looking at an estimated 40 to 50 Taliban fighters positioned along both ridge lines, with additional forces moving to block potential ground evacuation routes. Mitchell sat near the back of the room, his flight suit still damp with perspiration from the failed mission. The young captain carried himself with the subdued posture of a pilot who had been forced to abort a critical rescue operation. His co-pilot Davis remained in the medical facility, receiving treatment for minor shrapnel wounds sustained during their withdrawal under fire. "Sir," Mitchell reported, enemy forces demonstrated sophisticated coordination and advanced preparation. They had established multiple firing positions along every conventional approach vector, with overlapping fields of fire that made standard attack profiles extremely hazardous. Their defensive preparations suggest they have been studying our helicopter tactics extensively. Morrison nodded grimly, acknowledging what everyone in the room already understood. The Taliban fighters had evolved beyond the disorganized resistance of earlier conflicts, developing tactical sophistication that could counter established American procedures. The failure of conventional approaches demanded either accepting the loss of the convoy or finding alternative methods that enemy forces had not anticipated. Major Torres reviewed the latest intelligence assessments with increasing concern. "Sir, the terrain offers very limited options for helicopter operations. The narrow mountain corridor restricts maneuvering space while providing enemy forces with elevated firing positions that dominate all obvious approach routes. Any helicopter attempting standard insertion profiles will face concentrated fire from multiple directions simultaneously." Sarah remained seated along the wall, where she had positioned herself during the original briefing, listening carefully as senior officers struggled to develop alternative plans within the framework of conventional tactics. The tactical problem remained unchanged from that morning, but the urgency had increased dramatically as the convoy situation deteriorated and weather conditions began showing signs of potential complications. Hayes traced possible approach routes on the tactical display, each option revealing the same fundamental challenge. "Gentlemen, we are dealing with enemy forces that have specifically prepared to counter our standard helicopter operations. Every conventional approach vector leads directly into prepared kill zones with interlocking fields of fire." The room fell silent as officers contemplated the limited options available within established tactical doctrine. Standard procedures that had proven successful in hundreds of previous operations were inadequate against enemy forces that had studied and countered American helicopter tactics. Innovation was required, but institutional resistance to unconventional approaches constrained the range of alternatives under consideration. Warrant Officer Thompson, a senior maintenance chief with 20 years of helicopter experience, raised concerns about aircraft availability. "Sir, both damaged Apaches will require extensive repairs before returning to flight status. We currently have one fully operational Apache available for immediate deployment, but crew assignments present additional challenges." Morrison studied the personnel roster, recognizing that the failed mission had eliminated his most experienced Apache crew from immediate availability. The remaining pilots lacked Mitchell's combat experience in mountainous terrain, creating additional risks for any subsequent rescue attempt using conventional approaches. Sarah cleared her throat softly. "Sir, request permission to address the tactical situation." The general looked up from his paperwork, his expression showing the strained patience of a commander dealing with multiple crises simultaneously. "Captain Martinez, we are currently focused on developing viable options with available resources and experienced personnel. Sir, The failed mission confirms the analytical assessment I presented this morning. Enemy forces have prepared specifically to counter conventional helicopter tactics. Standard approaches will continue to fail regardless of crew experience because the fundamental tactical problem remains unchanged. Torres shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Captain, tactical analysis is valuable, but we need practical solutions that can be executed with available aircraft and qualified crews. This is not the time for theoretical discussions about alternative approaches. Sarah remained standing near the wall, her voice calm despite the growing tension in the room. Sir, I am not proposing theoretical alternatives. I am requesting assignment to execute a tactical approach that can succeed where conventional methods have failed. The terrain requires precision maneuvering capabilities that standard procedures cannot provide. Morrison set down his pen with the same deliberate precision he had demonstrated that morning. Captain, your confidence is noted, but this mission requires proven leadership under extreme conditions. We cannot risk additional aircraft losses on unproven tactics executed by crews lacking adequate combat experience. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes as officers explore modifications to standard procedures that might improve the chances of mission success. Each proposed alternative revealed the same fundamental limitations imposed by predictable flight patterns and enemy preparations designed to exploit conventional approaches. The tactical problem demanded innovation that institutional prejudice prevented decision-makers from seriously considering. Hayes finally addressed the elephant in the room. Sir, we may need to consider that helicopter extraction is not viable under current conditions. Ground forces could potentially reach the convoy, but movement through the mountain terrain would require significant time that the wounded soldiers may not have. The possibility of accepting mission failure hung over the conference room like a physical presence, challenging the professional identity of officers who had built their careers on the assumption that American military superiority could overcome any tactical challenge. The convoy represented both a humanitarian crisis and a test of institutional adaptability in the face of evolving enemy capabilities. Radio communications from the trapped soldiers provided constant reminders of deteriorating conditions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reported increasing enemy activity that suggested preparation for a final assault designed to overrun the defensive positions before American forces could mount an effective rescue operation. Time was running out for conventional solutions. Morrison studied the tactical display one final time before addressing the room. Gentlemen, we have exhausted conventional options. Prepare recommendations for ground-based extraction while we continue evaluating helicopter alternatives. The convoy situation requires immediate action regardless of tactical limitations. Sarah watched as senior officers filed out of the briefing room. Their conversations focused on damage control rather than innovative solutions. The institutional preference for familiar approaches had created a situation where tactical flexibility was desperately needed, but systematically discouraged. She understood that proving the value of unconventional methods would require demonstrating success under conditions that left no room for error. Sarah followed the dispersing officers into the corridor outside the briefing room, her boots echoing against polished linoleum floors that reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting. The institutional reluctance to consider unconventional approaches was costing precious time while soldiers remained trapped in deteriorating conditions. She understood that challenging established hierarchy required tactical precision equal to any combat mission. General Morrison walked toward his office with Colonel Hayes. Their conversation focused on damage assessments and resource allocation. Sarah quickened her pace, recognizing that institutional momentum was shifting toward accepting mission failure rather than exploring innovative alternatives. The narrow window for intervention was closing rapidly as decision-makers consolidated around conventional wisdom. Sir, request a moment to discuss tactical alternatives. Morrison paused near his office door, his expression showing the weary irritation of a commander dealing with persistent interruptions during crisis. Captain Martinez, we have reviewed all viable options within our operational parameters. The tactical situation requires solutions that can be executed with available resources and qualified personnel. Sarah positioned herself directly in front of the general, understanding that institutional deference would accomplish nothing while soldiers died in the mountains. Sir, conventional approaches are failing because enemy forces have specifically prepared to counter our predictable tactics. The terrain demands precision maneuvering that standard procedures cannot accommodate. Hayes stepped closer, his voice carrying warning undertones. Captain, questioning established procedures during active operations crosses the line from tactical input to insubordination. Senior leadership has evaluated all reasonable alternatives and made decisions based on extensive combat experience. Sir, Sarah continued, addressing Morrison directly. The convoy is trapped in a narrow corridor approximately 200 meters wide with enemy positions on elevated terrain dominating conventional approach vectors. Standard insertion profiles require aircraft to maintain predictable flight paths for extended periods while exposed to concentrated fire from multiple directions simultaneously. Morrison checked his watch, clearly calculating time constraints against competing priorities. Captain, your tactical analysis has been noted and incorporated into our planning process. However, mission execution requires proven capabilities rather than theoretical alternatives. We cannot risk additional aircraft losses on unproven methods. Sarah pulled out her tablet computer, displaying terrain analysis and tactical projections she had prepared during the afternoon. Sir, I am proposing a sideways approach that utilizes the terrain features to mask aircraft movement while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. The maneuver requires precision control but eliminates the predictable flight patterns that enemy forces have prepared to counter. The general glanced at the tactical display, his expression shifting from irritation toward cautious interest. Hayes moved closer to examine the proposed approach vector, his initial skepticism tempered by recognition that conventional alternatives had been exhausted. The corridor outside the briefing room buzzed with activity as personnel coordinated multiple operational priorities. Explain your approach vector, Morrison said finally, his tone suggesting professional curiosity rather than genuine consideration. Sarah highlighted specific terrain features on her tablet display. Sir, instead of approaching along conventional flight corridors, the aircraft would enter the target area at an extreme lateral angle, essentially flying sideways relative to the convoy position. This approach utilizes the natural terrain masking while presenting enemy forces with an engagement profile they have not prepared to counter. Hayes studied the proposed route with increasing concern. Captain, what you're describing requires aircraft control capabilities that exceed normal operational parameters. Maintaining stable flight while tilted at extreme angles demands precision that leaves no margin for error under combat conditions. Sir, Sarah replied, the Apache helicopter possesses maneuvering capabilities that conventional tactics do not fully utilize. The aircraft can maintain controlled flight at angles that appear impossible to ground observers while providing stable platforms for precision operations. Enemy forces have prepared to counter predictable approaches, not unconventional maneuvering that exploits terrain features. Morrison examined the tactical display more carefully, recognizing both the innovative potential and extreme risk associated with Sarah's proposed approach. The sideways insertion would indeed avoid prepared enemy firing positions, but it would also require piloting skills that exceeded standard training protocols and left no room for recovery if anything went wrong. Captain, even assuming your approach vector is theoretically viable, we lack crews with demonstrated experience executing such extreme maneuvering under combat conditions. This type of precision flying requires extensive training and proven capabilities that cannot be developed during active operations. Sir, Sarah said quietly, I have the necessary training and experience to execute this maneuver safely. My flight record includes extensive practice with unconventional approach vectors and precision maneuvering in challenging terrain. The tactical situation requires capabilities that conventional training does not address, but specialized preparation has equipped me to handle these requirements. Hayes shook his head emphatically. Captain, what you are proposing goes beyond unconventional tactics into experimental procedures that have never been tested under actual combat conditions. The risk of catastrophic failure outweighs any potential advantages, especially when executed by crews lacking extensive combat experience in similar situations. The conversation attracted attention from other personnel moving through the corridor, their expressions showing curiosity about the heated discussion between junior and senior officers. Sarah recognized that institutional resistance was hardening as her proposal challenged fundamental assumptions about appropriate tactical approaches and acceptable risk levels. Morrison studied the terrain analysis for several more minutes, clearly struggling between institutional caution and operational necessity. Sir, Sarah continued, the convoy situation is deteriorating rapidly. Conventional approaches have failed, and ground extraction will require more time than the wounded soldiers have available. The tactical situation demands innovation rather than adherence to procedures that enemy forces have learned to counter. The general finally looked up from the tactical display, his expression showing the conflicted responsibilities of a commander balancing multiple competing priorities. Captain Martinez, your analysis demonstrates thorough understanding of the tactical challenges we face. However, mission success requires not just innovative approaches, but demonstrated capabilities to execute complex operations under extreme conditions. Sarah understood that institutional momentum was shifting toward accepting her proposed approach, but significant resistance remained regarding her qualifications to execute such demanding maneuvers. The tactical argument had been won, but the personal credibility battle continued to constrain operational decision-making. Sir, the convoy has been under fire for 10 hours. Standard procedures have failed, and alternative approaches require immediate implementation. The tactical situation will not improve with additional delay, while we search for perfect solutions that may not exist within conventional parameters. Morrison exchanged glances with Hayes, recognizing that operational necessity was beginning to override institutional preferences. The conversation represented a critical decision point where innovative approaches could either prove their value or result in catastrophic failure that would reinforce resistance to unconventional tactics for years to come. The radio crackled with urgent transmission from the mountains as Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reported increasing enemy activity around the convoy perimeter. Enemy forces appearing to mass for coordinated assault. Multiple casualties require immediate medical evacuation. Request status on extraction timeline. Morrison listened to the transmission through his handheld radio, the desperate tone cutting through institutional debates about tactical approaches and crew qualifications. The convoy had been pinned down for 11 hours, and conventional wisdom had produced nothing but failed rescue attempts and damaged aircraft. Time was becoming the decisive factor in a situation where innovation represented the only remaining hope. Hayes pulled Morrison aside, lowering his voice to avoid being overheard by nearby personnel. Sir, authorizing unproven tactics executed by inexperienced crews represents significant risk to both mission success and personnel safety. If Captain Martinez fails, we lose another aircraft and potentially create an even worse tactical situation. The general stared through the window toward the flight line, where maintenance crews worked frantically to restore the damaged Apache helicopters to operational status. Only one aircraft remained immediately available for deployment, and crew assignments presented challenging decisions between experience and innovation. Standard procedures had failed, but alternatives carried risks that could destroy careers and cost lives. Captain Martinez, Morrison said finally, assuming I authorize your proposed approach, walk me through the specific execution details. I need to understand exactly what you intend to do and how you plan to manage the extreme risks involved. Sarah opened her tablet computer again, displaying detailed schematics of the Apache helicopter and its control systems. Sir, the maneuver exploits the aircraft's ability to maintain controlled flight at angles that exceed normal operational parameters. By approaching the target area while tilted approximately 60 degrees from vertical, the helicopter presents a minimal profile to enemy observers while utilizing terrain masking to avoid prepared firing positions. Hayes studied the technical specifications with growing skepticism. "Captain, what you are describing requires sustained flight at angles that stress the aircraft beyond normal design limits. Even minor control errors at those angles could result in catastrophic loss of aircraft control with no possibility of recovery." "Sir," Sarah replied, "extensive simulator training has demonstrated that the Apache can safely maintain these flight attitudes for the duration required to complete the extraction mission. The aircraft's digital flight control systems provide stability assistance that makes precision maneuvering possible even under extreme conditions." Morrison examined the proposed flight profile, recognizing both the innovative potential and catastrophic risks associated with attempting such demanding maneuvers during actual combat operations. The sideways approach would indeed avoid enemy preparations, but it would also push aircraft and crew capabilities to their absolute limits with no margin for error. "Captain, even assuming your approach is technically feasible, how do you plan to maintain stable hover while tilted at extreme angles during casualty loading procedures?" "Medical evacuation requires extended periods of precise positioning that become exponentially more difficult when the aircraft is not in normal flight attitude." Sarah highlighted specific phases of the proposed operation on her tactical display. "Sir, the evacuation sequence would occur in stages, with the aircraft maintaining the tilted attitude only during approach and departure phases. Once positioned over the convoy, normal flight attitude would be resumed for casualty loading operations before returning to sideways configuration for extraction under fire." The conversation attracted attention from other aviation personnel who gathered nearby to observe the unprecedented discussion about experimental tactical procedures. Word was spreading throughout the flight operations community that conventional approaches had failed and innovative alternatives were under serious consideration despite institutional resistance. Torres approached the group, carrying updated intelligence reports that painted an increasingly desperate picture of the convoy situation. "Sir, latest reconnaissance indicates enemy forces have moved additional weapons into positions that dominate all conventional approach vectors. Any helicopter attempting standard insertion procedures will face concentrated fire from at least 12 different locations simultaneously." Morrison studied the updated threat assessment, understanding that enemy preparations had eliminated virtually all conventional options for helicopter extraction. The tactical situation demanded either accepting mission failure or authorizing experimental procedures that challenged fundamental assumptions about acceptable risk levels and operational safety. Hayes voiced the concerns that every senior officer understood but hesitated to articulate directly. "Sir, authorizing unproven tactics sets a precedent that could undermine established safety protocols and encourage junior officers to propose experimental procedures during future operations. The institutional implications extend far beyond this single mission." Sarah recognized that the debate had shifted from tactical feasibility toward broader questions about institutional change and operational precedents. The convoy situation provided an opportunity to demonstrate the value of innovative approaches, but failure would reinforce resistance to unconventional thinking for years to come. "Sir," she said quietly, "the tactical situation requires capabilities that conventional training does not address. Enemy forces have evolved beyond our current procedures, and adaptation requires accepting short-term risks to develop long-term solutions. The convoy represents both a humanitarian crisis and an opportunity to prove that American military forces can innovate faster than our enemies can adapt." Morrison walked toward the window overlooking the flight line, watching as ground crews completed pre-flight preparations on the remaining operational Apache helicopter. The aircraft represented both the tool needed to save trapped soldiers and the potential instrument of catastrophic failure if experimental procedures exceeded the limits of technology and human capability. The radio transmitted another urgent message from Rodriguez. "Control, enemy forces moving to assault positions. Estimate 15 minutes before coordinated attack begins. Request immediate extraction authorization regardless of tactical constraints. The countdown had begun. Within a quarter hour, enemy forces would launch their final assault on the convoy positions, ending any possibility of successful rescue regardless of tactical approaches or crew capabilities. The window for decision-making was closing rapidly as operational necessity overwhelmed institutional caution. Captain Martinez, Morrison said finally, "You have authorization to attempt your proposed extraction using the sideways approach vector. However, understand that mission failure will have consequences that extend far beyond this single operation. You're not just risking your own career and life, but potentially the lives of every soldier in that convoy." Sarah felt the weight of institutional skepticism and personal responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. The authorization represented both validation of her tactical analysis and acceptance of risks that could destroy everything she had worked to achieve. The next hour would determine whether innovation could triumph over conventional wisdom or catastrophic failure would reinforce institutional resistance to change. Hayes handed her the mission briefing packet with obvious reluctance. "Captain, you have 15 minutes to complete pre-flight procedures and launch. The convoy situation will not survive additional delays, regardless of tactical approach or crew qualifications." Sarah strode across the scorching tarmac toward the waiting Apache helicopter, her flight gear adjusted for maximum mobility during the demanding maneuvers ahead. The afternoon heat had intensified to nearly unbearable levels, with surface temperatures exceeding 120 degrees that made every metal surface too hot to touch with bare skin. Ground crews completed final fuel checks and weapon system verifications while she conducted her abbreviated pre-flight inspection. Chief Warrant Officer Thompson, the senior maintenance supervisor, met her at the aircraft with obvious concern written across his weathered features. "Captain, I have never seen anyone attempt the maneuvers you are proposing in actual combat conditions. The aircraft is mechanically sound, but what you are planning pushes every system beyond normal operational limits." Sarah ran her hands along the Apache's control surfaces, checking for any irregularities that might affect performance during extreme maneuvering. The helicopter represented the pinnacle of American military technology, designed for precision operations in hostile environments. But conventional tactics had never fully exploited its maximum capabilities. Today would test both machine and pilot at the absolute limits of their potential. "Ma'am," Thompson continued, "the digital flight control systems will provide stability assistance, but they were programmed for normal flight attitudes. Once you exceed 60 degrees of tilt, you will be flying beyond the parameters that the computers understand. Everything depends on your manual control skills and ability to read the aircraft's behavior in real time." The radio in her helmet crackled with urgent communications from the convoy as enemy forces continued their preparations for the final assault. Rodriguez reported movement along both ridgelines that suggested coordinated positioning for a simultaneous attack from multiple directions. The trapped soldiers had perhaps 10 minutes before facing overwhelming numbers with depleted ammunition and no hope of reinforcement. Sarah climbed into the Apache's front seat, adjusting harness straps and helmet connections while running through mental checklists that covered both standard procedures and the extraordinary maneuvers planned for this mission. The cockpit's familiar layout provided reassurance, but today's flight would demand capabilities that no training program had ever attempted to develop. "Phoenix 1, this is Control. You are cleared for immediate departure. Convoy reports enemy assault imminent. Time to target area is critical for mission success. Roger Control, Phoenix 1 departing now." The Apache's twin engines spooled up to flight power with their characteristic high-pitched whine that rose above the ambient noise of flight line operations. Sarah felt the aircraft respond to her control inputs, lifting smoothly from the concrete in textbook demonstration of normal helicopter operations. The transition from routine departure to experimental maneuvering would occur gradually as she approached the target area. The flight toward the mountains proceeded along established corridors designed to minimize exposure to hostile observation and potential ground fire. Sarah monitored radio communications from other aircraft in the area while reviewing the tactical approach she would attempt in approximately 15 minutes. The proposed sideways insertion represented either breakthrough, innovation, or catastrophic failure, with no middle ground for partial success. Phoenix 1. Be advised that enemy forces have repositioned additional weapons along your planned approach vector. Latest intelligence indicates at least 15 separate firing positions covering all conventional flight paths to the convoy location. Roger Control. Phoenix 1 copies updated threat assessment. Maintaining planned approach vector. The mountainous terrain ahead showed the scars of ongoing conflict, with smoke rising from multiple locations where explosive impacts had gouged craters in the rocky landscape. Sarah could see the narrow corridor where the convoy remained trapped, a thin ribbon of road winding between towering ridgelines that provided enemy forces with commanding fields of fire in all directions. As she approached the target area, Sarah began the gradual transition from conventional flight attitude toward the extreme, tilted configuration that would define her unconventional approach. The Apache responded smoothly to her control inputs, maintaining stable flight even as the angle increased beyond normal operational parameters. Digital displays showed aircraft systems functioning normally despite the unusual flight attitude. Phoenix 1 Control. We are observing your approach on radar. Your flight profile appears to be outside normal parameters. Confirm aircraft status and pilot condition. Control. Phoenix 1. Aircraft systems normal. Beginning tactical approach per mission profile. The Apache continued its transformation from conventional helicopter to experimental demonstration of extreme maneuvering capabilities. Sarah felt the aircraft's behavior change as aerodynamic forces shifted, requiring constant control adjustments to maintain stable flight while tilted at increasingly dramatic angles. The digital flight control systems provided assistance, but ultimate responsibility rested with her ability to read the aircraft's responses and anticipate control requirements. Below, enemy observers began noticing the unusual aircraft behavior, but struggled to understand what they were witnessing. The sideways approach presented a profile that differed dramatically from conventional helicopter operations, confusing targeting calculations and forcing hasty adjustments to weapon positions that had been carefully prepared for predictable American tactics. Phoenix 1. We are receiving reports of enemy confusion regarding your approach vector. Ground observers report that hostile forces appear uncertain about engagement priorities and are repositioning weapons to track your unusual flight path. Roger Control. That is the intended effect. Continuing approach to target area. The convoy position became clearly visible ahead, with vehicles clustered in defensive formation along the narrow road, while smoke and debris marked recent enemy impacts. Sarah could see soldiers taking cover behind improvised barricades while medical personnel attended to wounded comrades who required immediate evacuation. The tactical situation demanded precision execution with no margin for error. Phoenix 1. Enemy forces opening fire from multiple positions. We are tracking at least 12 separate muzzle flashes along both ridgelines. You're approaching the most heavily defended section of the corridor. Sarah felt the Apache shudder slightly as enemy rounds passed close to the aircraft, but the sideways approach vector made accurate targeting extremely difficult for ground-based weapons that had been positioned to engage conventional flight profiles. The experimental maneuver was working exactly as predicted, utilizing enemy preparations against conventional tactics to create opportunities for unconventional success. Control. Phoenix 1 beginning final approach to convoy position. Preparing for transition to extraction configuration. The most challenging phase of the mission was about to begin. Sarah would need to maintain the extreme tilted attitude while positioning the Apache precisely over the convoy, then transition to normal flight attitude for casualty loading operations before returning to sideways configuration for extraction under fire. Each phase required split-second timing and perfect control with no possibility of recovery from mistakes. Phoenix 1. Convoy reports ready for immediate evacuation. Enemy assault forces moving to final positions. Estimate 5 minutes before coordinated attack begins. The countdown was accelerating as Sarah approached the narrow window where success remained possible. The Apache hung in the air at impossible angles while enemy forces struggled to adjust their targeting to counter an approach vector that defied conventional wisdom and challenged fundamental assumptions about helicopter operations in hostile terrain. The Apache maintained its impossible sideways attitude as Sarah approached the final phase of her unconventional insertion. The aircraft tilted at nearly 70 degrees while still maintaining controlled flight through the narrow mountain corridor. Enemy fire intensified from positions along both ridgelines, but the rounds passed harmlessly through the space where conventional helicopters would have been flying according to predictable tactical approaches. Phoenix 1 Control. We are tracking multiple RPG launches from our 9 and 3 o'clock positions. Enemy forces appear to be firing at projected intercept points based on standard flight profiles. Roger Control. Their targeting solutions are calculated for conventional approaches, maintaining current flight attitude and vector. The convoy below grew larger as Sarah descended toward the improvised landing zone marked by smoke grenades deployed by Rodriguez and his soldiers. The narrow road provided barely adequate space for helicopter operations under normal circumstances, but the sideways approach would require even more precise positioning to avoid obstacles and maintain safe clearance from surrounding terrain features. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio with barely controlled urgency. Phoenix 1, we have 2 critical casualties requiring immediate evacuation. Enemy forces are moving to assault positions approximately 3 minutes out. We need you on the ground now. Sarah could see the wounded soldiers being prepared for evacuation, their still forms attended by medics who worked frantically to stabilize injuries while preparing for rapid loading procedures. The tactical situation allowed no time for conventional approaches to casualty handling. Everything would need to happen with split-second precision while under concentrated enemy fire. Phoenix 1 beginning transition to extraction configuration. Stand by for landing. The most demanding phase of the entire mission was about to begin. Sarah would need to gradually return the Apache to normal flight attitude while maintaining precise positioning over the convoy, then execute a perfect landing in the confined space between vehicles and rocky outcroppings. Any error in timing or control would result in catastrophic impact with either the ground or surrounding obstacles. The Apache responded smoothly to her control inputs as the extreme tilt angle began decreasing toward more conventional flight attitudes. Digital displays showed aircraft systems compensating for the unusual maneuvering while maintaining stability throughout the transition. Sarah felt the aerodynamic forces shifting as the helicopter gradually returned to familiar flight characteristics. Phoenix 1. Enemy forces opening concentrated fire from elevated positions. We are tracking heavy machine gun emplacements along both ridgelines, directing sustained fire at your projected landing zone. The air around the Apache filled with tracer rounds and explosive impacts, as enemy forces directed everything available toward the landing area, where they expected the helicopter to become vulnerable during ground operations. Sarah continued her approach despite the increasingly dangerous environment, understanding that hesitation would doom both the convoy and her mission. Control, Phoenix 1. Enemy fire is concentrated on conventional landing zones, adjusting approach vector to utilize terrain masking while maintaining extraction capability. Rodriguez and his soldiers provided suppressing fire toward identified enemy positions while clearing improvised landing zones among the convoy vehicles. The defensive formation had been carefully arranged to provide maximum protection for wounded personnel, but helicopter operations would require exposing both aircraft and ground forces to concentrated hostile fire. Phoenix 1, we have you visual. Your approach angle appears to be stabilizing, but still outside normal operational parameters. Confirm landing zone preparation and casualty readiness for immediate evacuation. Sarah could see individual soldiers moving among the convoy vehicles, their faces turned upward to track her approach while maintaining defensive positions against potential ground assault. The Apache's unusual flight profile had attracted attention from every person in the area, both friendly forces and enemy observers who struggled to understand what they were witnessing. Convoy, Phoenix 1. Preparing for landing. Have casualties ready for immediate loading. Ground time will be minimal due to enemy pressure and tactical constraints. The Apache descended through layers of smoke and dust kicked up by recent explosive impacts while maintaining the precise control required for landing in the confined space between military vehicles. Sarah felt the aircraft respond to every minor control input as she balanced the competing demands of precision, positioning, and defensive maneuvering against ongoing enemy fire. Phoenix 1. Enemy assault forces moving to within 200 meters of convoy perimeter. Estimate 2 minutes before coordinated ground attack begins. Expedite extraction procedures. The timeline was compressing rapidly as enemy forces moved to final assault positions while the Apache completed its approach to the improvised landing zone. Sarah could see Taliban fighters moving among the rocky outcroppings along both ridge lines, their weapons trained on the convoy position where they expected to overwhelm defensive positions through coordinated attack. The helicopter's landing skids touched down on the rocky ground between convoy vehicles with mechanical precision despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the approach and landing. Sarah immediately began shutdown procedures for the extraction phase while maintaining engine power for rapid departure once casualty loading was completed. Convoy, Phoenix 1 on deck. Beginning casualty loading immediately. Maintain suppressing fire on identified enemy positions during ground operations. Rodriguez and his medics moved with practiced efficiency to transfer wounded soldiers from their protected positions to the Apache's cabin area. Their movements coordinated despite the stress of ongoing enemy fire and time pressure. The evacuation procedure represented the culmination of months of training and preparation that was now being tested under actual combat conditions. Sarah monitored aircraft systems while tracking enemy movement through her sensor displays, noting increased activity along both ridge lines as hostile forces prepared for their final assault on the convoy positions. The Apache remained vulnerable during ground operations, but the sideways approach had successfully avoided the prepared kill zones that had defeated conventional rescue attempts. Phoenix 1, casualty loading complete. 2 critical patients secured and ready for immediate evacuation. Enemy forces massing for coordinated assault from multiple directions. The ground phase was complete, but the most dangerous part of the mission was just beginning. Sarah would need to execute takeoff procedures while transitioning back to the sideways flight attitude that had enabled successful insertion, all while enemy forces directed concentrated fire at the departing aircraft. The extraction phase would test both her flying skills and the Apache's capabilities under maximum stress conditions. Roger. Convoy, Phoenix 1 departing immediately. Maintain defensive positions and prepare for enemy ground assault. Medical evacuation proceeding to base hospital. The Apache lifted smoothly from the improvised landing zone as Sarah began the complex transition back to sideways flight configuration while climbing away from the convoy position. The Apache climbed away from the convoy position with 2 critically wounded soldiers secured in the cabin area. Their condition stabilized, but requiring immediate transport to advanced medical facilities. Sarah began the demanding transition back to sideways flight configuration while enemy forces below directed concentrated fire at the departing aircraft. The extraction phase would prove whether her unconventional approach could succeed under the most challenging conditions. Phoenix 1 Control. We are tracking multiple SAM launches from your departure vector. Enemy forces appear to have repositioned portable surface-to-air missiles specifically to target your extraction route. Sarah felt the Apache respond to her control inputs as she initiated the transition to extreme flight attitude while climbing through increasingly dangerous airspace. The helicopter's digital systems provided stability assistance, but the combination of wounded passengers, enemy fire, and experimental maneuvering pushed both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. Roger Control, Phoenix 1 transitioning to tactical departure configuration. Wounded passengers are stable and secured for transport. Below, Rodriguez and his remaining soldiers watch the Apache's impossible departure maneuver while preparing defensive positions for the enemy ground assault that would begin within minutes. The successful extraction of wounded personnel had improved morale and tactical flexibility, but the convoy remained trapped in the narrow mountain corridor with limited ammunition and no prospect of reinforcement. Phoenix 1, enemy ground assault has commenced. Convoy reports coordinated attack from multiple directions with estimated 40 Taliban fighters participating. Your extraction success has prevented medical casualties, but ground situation remains critical. The Apache tilted to its maximum sideways attitude while climbing through layers of smoke and explosive debris that marked recent enemy impacts throughout the mountain corridor. Sarah maintained precise control despite the challenging flight attitude and ongoing hostile fire, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded conventional training and challenged assumptions about helicopter operations in combat environments. Control, Phoenix 1 proceeding to base hospital with critical patients. Estimated flight time 12 minutes at current speed and configuration. The experimental maneuver had succeeded beyond expectations, utilizing enemy preparations against conventional tactics to enable successful extraction where standard procedures had failed. Sarah felt the satisfaction of tactical innovation validated under extreme conditions, but understood that institutional acceptance would require more than single-mission success. In a command center, General Morrison and his staff monitored radio communications from both the departing Apache and the ongoing ground battle of the convoy position. The successful extraction represented vindication of unconventional approaches, but questions remained about broader applications and institutional implications of experimental tactics. Phoenix 1 Control. Your flight profile continues to show parameters outside normal operational limits. Confirm aircraft systems status and pilot condition during extended sideways flight operations. Control, Phoenix 1. Aircraft systems normal, pilot condition satisfactory. Unconventional flight attitude is intentional and within demonstrated capabilities for this mission profile. The Apache maintained its impossible sideways configuration while traversing mountainous terrain that would have challenged conventional helicopter operations even under ideal conditions. Sarah monitored wounded passengers through cabin cameras while managing aircraft systems that operated at the edge of their design parameters throughout the demanding flight back to base. Torres stood in the Flight Operations Center, watching radar displays that showed the Apache's unconventional flight path toward the base hospital. That is not possible. No helicopter can maintain stable flight at those angles for extended periods while carrying passengers and operating in combat conditions. Hayes nodded slowly, his expression showing grudging acknowledgement that conventional wisdom had been challenged by demonstrated capability. Captain Martinez has apparently developed flying techniques that exceed our understanding of helicopter operational limits. The question becomes whether such extreme methods can be safely replicated by other crews. Phoenix 1, Base Hospital. We are prepared for immediate casualty reception. Emergency medical teams standing by for critical patient care. Estimated arrival time in 8 minutes. Roger Base Hospital, Phoenix 1 inbound with 2 critical casualties. Patients have been stable throughout flight operations. Requesting immediate surgical preparation upon arrival. The radio communications attracted attention from personnel throughout the base as word spread about the successful extraction accomplished through experimental tactics that had never been attempted under actual combat conditions. Sarah's unconventional approach had achieved mission success where conventional methods had failed, challenging institutional assumptions about acceptable risk and operational innovation. General Morrison studied radar displays showing the Apache's continuing flight toward base, noting the aircraft's stable performance despite flight attitudes that exceeded normal operational parameters. The mission represented both tactical success and institutional precedent that would influence future decisions about experimental procedures and unconventional approaches. Control, Phoenix 1. Aircraft performing normally throughout extended sideways flight operations. Wounded passengers remain stable with no complications from unusual flight profile. Conventional flight attitude will be resumed during final approach to base hospital. The successful extraction had validated Sarah's tactical analysis while demonstrating capabilities that conventional training programs had never attempted to develop. The Apache's performance under extreme conditions proved that existing aircraft possess potential that standard procedures failed to exploit, opening possibilities for tactical innovation that challenged established doctrine. Phoenix 1, we have you on final approach vector. Ground crews and medical teams are positioned for immediate patient transfer. Your mission success has attracted significant attention from senior leadership and aviation community. Sarah began the gradual transition back to conventional flight attitude as she approached the base hospital, feeling the Apache respond smoothly to control inputs that returned the aircraft to familiar operational parameters. The experimental phase was ending, but institutional implications would continue long after the wounded soldiers received advanced medical care. Base Hospital, Phoenix 1 on final approach. 2 critical patients ready for immediate transfer to emergency medical teams. Mission accomplished with 0 complications from unconventional flight operations. The Apache settled onto the hospital landing pad with textbook precision despite the extraordinary circumstances that had defined the entire mission. Medical personnel moved quickly to transfer wounded soldiers from aircraft to treatment facilities, while Sarah completed shutdown procedures that concluded the most demanding flight of her career. Ground crews surrounded the Apache to conduct post-flight inspections that would determine whether experimental maneuvering had caused any structural damage or mechanical problems. The aircraft appeared undamaged despite operating at the limits of its design parameters throughout the mission, validating both technological capabilities and tactical innovation under extreme conditions. Phoenix 1 Control. Mission success confirmed with 0 casualties and successful patient evacuation. Your unconventional approach has achieved results that conventional tactics could not accomplish. Senior leadership requests immediate debrief upon aircraft shutdown completion. Sarah climbed out of the Apache's cockpit with the knowledge that her experimental approach had succeeded beyond expectations while challenging institutional assumptions about helicopter capabilities and tactical limitations. The mission represented both personal vindication and broader precedent for innovation in military operations. The successful extraction would require comprehensive analysis to determine broader applications and training implications for other crews, but the immediate tactical problem had been solved through capabilities that conventional wisdom insisted were impossible. Sarah walked through the automatic doors of the Flight Operations Center while medical teams wheeled the rescued soldiers toward emergency treatment facilities. The fluorescent lights seemed harsh after hours of natural sunlight filtered through aircraft windows, and the air conditioning provided welcome relief from the oppressive heat that had defined the entire mission. Personnel throughout the building turned to stare as she passed, their expressions showing mixtures of curiosity, respect, and disbelief. General Morrison stood near the tactical display where he had dismissed her proposal 12 hours earlier, his weathered features showing none of the skepticism that had characterized their morning interaction. Colonel Hayes positioned himself beside the radar console, studying flight data that documented every aspect of the unconventional extraction mission. The electronic records would provide irrefutable evidence of capabilities that exceeded conventional understanding. Captain Martinez, Morrison said as she approached the group of senior officers, "Your mission success has been confirmed through multiple independent sources. The extraction was accomplished with zero casualties and complete tactical success despite enemy preparations that defeated conventional approaches. Sarah stopped in front of the tactical display, where satellite imagery showed the convoy position and surrounding terrain that had trapped 17 vehicles for 13 hours. The narrow mountain corridor appeared even more forbidding when viewed from above, with enemy positions clearly visible along both ridgelines that commanded every conventional approach vector. Sir, the tactical situation required capabilities that standard procedures could not provide. Enemy forces had specifically prepared to counter our conventional helicopter operations, making innovation essential for mission success. Torres stepped forward from where he had been monitoring radio communications, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity about techniques that challenged fundamental assumptions regarding helicopter capabilities. Captain, your flight profile showed sustained operation at angles that exceed published aircraft limitations. How did you maintain stable control throughout such extreme maneuvering? Sarah moved to the computer terminal where flight data from her Apache remained displayed in real-time graphs and technical readouts. The information showed aircraft performance parameters that documented every aspect of the unconventional approach, from initial departure through sideways insertion and successful extraction under fire. The Apache helicopter possesses maneuvering capabilities that conventional tactics do not fully utilize. Digital flight control systems provide stability assistance that makes precision operation possible even at extreme attitudes, but pilot technique becomes the determining factor for successful execution. Hayes examined the technical data with growing amazement, noting performance measurements that exceeded every baseline established through years of conventional helicopter operations. Your aircraft maintained stable flight while tilted beyond 70 degrees for extended periods, while carrying wounded passengers through hostile airspace. The engineering implications alone will require comprehensive analysis. Morrison studied the mission timeline displayed on the tactical screen, noting how the unconventional approach had avoided every prepared enemy position while accomplishing objectives that conventional tactics could not achieve. The tactical innovation represented both immediate success and longer-term implications for military aviation that would influence doctrine for years to come. Captain, your analytical assessment proved accurate in every detail. Enemy forces had indeed prepared specifically to counter our standard helicopter tactics, making conventional extraction impossible regardless of crew experience or aircraft capabilities. Innovation was required, and your approach provided the necessary breakthrough. The Flight Operations Center buzzed with controlled activity as personnel coordinated ongoing missions while processing the implications of tactical success achieved through experimental procedures. Sarah recognized that institutional acceptance was beginning to replace skepticism, but understood that broader applications would require systematic development and training programs. Dalton approached the group with obvious reluctance, his earlier confidence about conventional superiority replaced by grudging acknowledgement of demonstrated capability. Ma'am, I have never seen helicopter maneuvering like what you accomplished today. The sideways approach should be impossible according to everything we know about aircraft limitations and pilot training. Sarah remained near the tactical display, understanding that her mission's success represented validation not just of personal capabilities, but of innovative thinking that challenged institutional assumptions. Sir, the mission demonstrated that existing aircraft possess potential that conventional procedures fail to exploit. Enemy adaptation requires corresponding innovation in our tactical approaches. General Morrison exchanged glances with his staff officers, recognizing that the successful extraction had proven capabilities that exceeded conventional understanding while opening possibilities for tactical development that conventional wisdom had never considered. The institutional implications extended far beyond single mission success. Captain Martinez, your unconventional approach achieved mission objectives that conventional tactics could not accomplish, validating analytical insights that challenged established doctrine. The tactical innovation represents both immediate success and potential foundation for broader operational development. The radar console continued displaying flight data that documented every aspect of the experimental mission, providing technical evidence that would support comprehensive analysis of capabilities and techniques that exceeded conventional training programs. Sarah understood that institutional change required more than demonstrated success under extreme conditions. Hayes pulled up additional technical displays showing aircraft performance throughout the mission, noting stress measurements and control responses that revealed margins of safety maintained despite operation at the limits of design parameters. "Captain, your flying technique appears to have compensated for theoretical limitations through precision control that maintains safety throughout extreme maneuvering. Sir, extensive simulator training developed the necessary skills for managing aircraft behavior at unconventional attitudes. The Apache's digital systems provide assistance, but ultimate success depends on pilot technique and understanding of aircraft responses under extreme conditions." Torres examined the tactical analysis that had predicted enemy preparations and conventional mission failure, recognizing accuracy that exceeded intelligence assessments developed through established procedures. "Your analytical methodology identified tactical problems that conventional approaches missed, enabling development of solutions that proved effective under actual combat conditions. The successful extraction had validated innovative approaches while demonstrating capabilities that institutional skepticism had dismissed as impossible." Sarah recognized that her mission represented both personal vindication and precedent for tactical development that challenged conventional limitations. Morrison addressed the assembled personnel with the authority of a commander whose tactical assumptions had been fundamentally challenged by demonstrated capability. "Today's mission success proves that innovation can triumph over conventional wisdom when analytical insight combines with exceptional execution. Captain Martinez has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our institutional understanding." The Flight Operations Center fell silent except for the steady hum of electronic equipment and distant sounds of ongoing base operations. Sarah understood that institutional recognition represented both achievement and responsibility for development of capabilities that conventional training had never attempted to address. The tactical success achieved through unconventional methods would require comprehensive analysis to determine broader applications, but immediate mission objectives have been accomplished through innovation that proved superior to established doctrine under extreme conditions. The silence in the Flight Operations Center stretched for long seconds as the full implications of Sarah's successful mission settled over the assembled officers. General Morrison stood motionless beside the tactical display, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the console as he processed information that challenged decades of institutional assumptions about helicopter capabilities and tactical limitations. Torres stepped back from the radar console. His expression transformed from professional skepticism to something approaching awe. That should not have been possible. Everything we know about aircraft design limits and pilot training says sustained flight at those angles will result in catastrophic loss of control. Hayes examined the technical data one more time, shaking his head slowly as he absorbed performance measurements that exceeded every established baseline for helicopter operations. The aircraft maintained stable flight throughout maneuvers that our engineering specifications classify as impossible. Your control technique compensated for theoretical limitations that should have made the mission unachievable. Sarah watched the institutional transformation occurring around her, understanding that her tactical success had created a precedent that would influence military aviation development for years to come. The experimental approach had proven effective not through luck or exceptional circumstances, but through systematic application of capabilities that conventional wisdom had never attempted to exploit. Dalton cleared his throat uncomfortably, his earlier confidence about proven methods replaced by obvious uncertainty about assumptions he had never questioned. "Ma'am, I need to apologize for my assessment this morning. Your capabilities clearly exceed conventional understanding, and the mission's success speaks for itself. General Morrison finally looked up from the tactical display, his expression showing the complex mixture of respect and institutional recalculation that accompanied fundamental challenges to established doctrine. Captain Martinez, your analytical insights and execution capabilities have demonstrated innovations that conventional approaches could not achieve. The acknowledgement represented more than simple recognition of mission success. Sarah understood that institutional acceptance was replacing skepticism as senior officers processed the implications of tactical effectiveness achieved through methods that challenged every assumption about acceptable risk and operational limitations. Colonel Barnes entered the Flight Operations Center carrying updated medical reports about the rescued soldiers, his expression showing relief that critical patients were receiving advanced treatment that would ensure complete recovery. Captain, both wounded soldiers are stable and responding well to emergency medical care. Your extraction mission saved their lives through capabilities that conventional approaches could not provide. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility that accompanied tactical innovation under extreme conditions. The successful mission had validated experimental approaches while demonstrating that institutional resistance to change could prevent optimal solutions unless individual officers possessed the determination to challenge established wisdom. The tactical display continued showing satellite imagery of the convoy position where Rodriguez and his remaining soldiers had successfully repelled the enemy ground assault with minimal casualties. The extraction of wounded personnel had improved defensive capabilities while proving that unconventional thinking could achieve objectives that standard procedures failed to accomplish. Hayes addressed the broader implications that extended beyond immediate mission success. Captain, your tactical methodology represents potential foundation for comprehensive development of capabilities that conventional training programs have never attempted to address. The institutional applications could revolutionize our approach to helicopter operations in contested environments. Morrison nodded slowly, recognizing that today's mission represented both tactical achievement and strategic precedent for innovation that challenged fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness. Your success demonstrates that enemy adaptation requires corresponding evolution in our operational capabilities rather than rigid adherence to established procedures. Torres studied the flight data with renewed interest, noting technical details that revealed precision control maintained throughout extreme maneuvering that should have exceeded human capabilities. The flying technique you demonstrated suggests training methodologies that exceed conventional programs. How did you develop skills that institutional education failed to provide? Sarah understood that institutional change required more than demonstrated success. It demanded systematic development of capabilities that could be replicated by other personnel through organized training programs. Sir, extensive simulator practice developed the necessary skills for managing aircraft behavior under extreme conditions. But conventional training focuses on standard procedures rather than maximum capability exploitation. The conversation attracted attention from personnel throughout the Flight Operations Center as word spread about tactical innovation that had succeeded where established methods failed. Sarah recognized that institutional momentum was shifting toward acceptance of experimental approaches that challenged conventional limitations. Dalton examined the mission timeline with obvious fascination, noting how unconventional tactics had avoided every prepared enemy position while accomplishing objectives through methods that exceeded theoretical limitations. Ma'am, your approach represents tactical thinking that goes beyond conventional wisdom to exploit capabilities that standard procedures ignore. Morrison addressed the assembled personnel with the authority of a commander whose institutional assumptions had been fundamentally challenged by demonstrated effectiveness. Today's mission proves that innovation can achieve results that conventional approaches cannot accomplish when analytical insight combines with exceptional execution under extreme conditions. The Flight Operations Center buzzed with discussions about tactical implications and training development as personnel processed the significance of capabilities that exceeded conventional understanding. Sarah understood that her mission success represented both personal achievement and institutional precedent for innovation in military operations. Hayes pulled additional technical data showing stress measurements and performance parameters maintained throughout the experimental mission, noting safety margins that proved unconventional approaches could succeed without compromising operational security. Captain, your mission demonstrates that existing aircraft possess potential that conventional procedures fail to utilize effectively. The successful extraction had validated analytical insights that challenged established doctrine, while proving that institutional skepticism could prevent optimal solutions unless individual officers possess determination to pursue innovation despite resistance from conventional wisdom. Sarah recognized that broader acceptance would require systematic development of capabilities through organized training programs. Torres addressed the technical implications that extended beyond immediate mission success toward comprehensive development of helicopter capabilities that conventional understanding had never attempted to exploit. Ma'am, your flying technique suggests possibilities for tactical development that could revolutionize our approach to operations in contested environments. General Morrison studied the tactical display one final time before addressing Sarah directly with obvious respect that replaced the dismissive skepticism of their morning interaction. Captain Martinez, your mission success has demonstrated capabilities that exceed institutional understanding while validating analytical insights that challenged established assumptions about acceptable risk and operational limitations. The acknowledgement represented institutional recognition that innovation could triumph over conventional wisdom when exceptional execution combined with systematic analysis to achieve objectives that standard procedures could not accomplish under extreme conditions. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at the Army Aviation Center of Excellence, watching as helicopter crews from across the military gathered to observe the first formal demonstration of sideways insertion techniques. The experimental maneuver that had begun as desperate improvisation was being systematically developed in a standardized tactical doctrine through comprehensive training programs. General Morrison occupied the front row beside senior aviation commanders who had traveled from installations worldwide to witness capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about helicopter operations. The institutional resistance that had characterized initial reactions was being replaced by organized efforts to incorporate innovative approaches into conventional training curricula. The Apache helicopter positioned on the demonstration pad represented technological potential that conventional procedures had never fully exploited. Sarah understood that today's training demonstration would determine whether tactical innovation could be successfully transferred to other crews or remain limited to exceptional circumstances requiring unique capabilities. Captain Martinez, Morrison announced to the assembled audience, developed the unconventional approach techniques during operational necessity that demanded solutions beyond conventional tactical options. Today's demonstration will show systematic methods for developing similar capabilities in qualified personnel through organized training programs. Sarah moved toward the Apache while noting the expressions of professional skepticism mixed with curiosity among experienced pilots who had built careers on proven methods that prioritized safety over innovation. The challenge involved demonstrating that experimental techniques could be taught reliably rather than depending on exceptional individual capabilities. The demonstration proceeded through carefully planned phases that illustrated progressive skill development from basic unconventional attitudes through advanced maneuvering that approached the extreme angles utilized during the rescue mission. Each phase was documented through technical measurements that proved systematic training could develop capabilities beyond conventional limitations. Torres observed from the control tower, monitoring aircraft performance through sensors that measured stress levels and control responses throughout the demonstration flight. The data would provide foundation for engineering analysis that determined structural safety margins and operational parameters for broader tactical application. Ma'am, his voice carried through radio communications, aircraft performance remains within acceptable parameters throughout all demonstration phases. The systematic approach appears to maintain safety while developing capabilities that exceed conventional training programs. The Apache responded smoothly to Sarah's control inputs as she progressed through increasingly demanding maneuvers that illustrated the full range of unconventional capabilities. The demonstration showed that tactical innovation could be developed through organized methodology rather than requiring exceptional circumstances or unique individual talents. Hayes addressed the assembled audience from his position near the tactical display that showed real-time aircraft performance data. The systematic development of these capabilities represents institutional adaptation to enemy evolution rather than experimental risk-taking that compromises operational safety. Innovation becomes necessity when conventional approaches prove inadequate. The demonstration flight continued for 45 minutes, illustrating every aspect of sideways insertion technique through progressive skill development that other crews could replicate through organized training programs. Sarah felt the satisfaction of institutional validation as skepticism was replaced by professional recognition of tactical effectiveness. Dalton stood among the pilot observers, his expression showing transformation from initial resistance toward acceptance of capabilities that exceeded his conventional understanding. The demonstration proves that exceptional technique can be systematically developed rather than representing unique individual capabilities that cannot be replicated through standard training methods. General Morrison addressed the audience as the demonstration concluded with textbook precision that illustrated complete mastery of unconventional techniques. Today's presentation demonstrates that innovation can be systematically incorporated into institutional doctrine when analytical insight combines with organized development of tactical capabilities. The Apache settled onto the demonstration pad, while ground crews conducted post-flight inspections that would document any structural stress or mechanical issues resulting from extended unconventional maneuvering. The aircraft showed no signs of damage despite operating at the limits of design parameters throughout the demanding demonstration flight. Sarah climbed out of the cockpit with knowledge that institutional acceptance was becoming reality as tactical innovation transitioned from experimental risk towards standardized doctrine. The successful development of systematic training methods proved that unconventional approaches could be reliably incorporated into conventional military operations. The audience of experienced pilots began dispersing toward their own aircraft while discussing implementation timelines and training requirements for developing similar capabilities within their respective units. Sarah recognized that institutional momentum was building toward comprehensive adoption of tactical methods that had begun as desperate improvisation. Colonel Barnes approached with updated reports about the convoy soldiers who had been rescued through the original sideways insertion mission. Both wounded personnel have made complete recoveries and returned to full duty status. Your tactical innovation saved their lives while proving that institutional adaptation can occur when operational necessity demands innovative solutions. Morrison joined the conversation near the Apache helicopter that had demonstrated capabilities exceeding conventional understanding through systematic skill development. Captain Martinez, your analytical insights and execution capabilities have created tactical precedents that will influence military aviation for decades. Innovation has proven superior to institutional resistance when lives depend on optimal solutions. The training demonstration represented both personal achievement and institutional transformation as experimental approaches became accepted doctrine through systematic development of capabilities that conventional wisdom had dismissed as impossible. Sarah understood that tactical innovation required institutional courage to challenge established assumptions. Torres descended from the control tower, carrying technical data that documented aircraft performance throughout the demonstration flight. Captain, the systematic approach you have developed maintains safety margins while achieving capabilities that exceed theoretical limitations. The training methodology proves that innovation can be reliably incorporated into standard operations. As Sarah walked away from the demonstration area, she reflected on the journey from institutional skepticism toward accepted doctrine that had begun with desperate circumstances in Afghan mountains. The successful development of systematic training methods proved that military effectiveness could be enhanced through innovation that challenged conventional limitations while maintaining operational safety. What experiences have you had where questioning established methods led to better solutions? Sometimes the most effective approaches come from willingness to challenge assumptions that everyone accepts without examination. The story of tactical innovation often begins with individual determination to find better ways despite institutional resistance. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the flight line, where Apache helicopters represented both technological capability and human potential that conventional procedures had never fully exploited. Sarah understood that institutional change required sustained commitment to development of capabilities that challenged established assumptions about acceptable risk and operational limitations. The successful rescue mission had proven that innovation could triumph over conventional wisdom when analytical insight combined with exceptional execution under extreme conditions. Today's demonstration showed that such capabilities could be systematically developed and reliably transferred to other qualified personnel through organized training programs that expanded institutional effectiveness beyond traditional limitations.